My name is Joshua Feist, and I am the Director of Grant Making at Arts Midwest. I use the pronouns he, him. I am a white male in a room with polka dots behind me, wearing a black shirt. I have a few housekeeping items to share with the group today. We have live transcript services or closed captions being provided today automatically. If you do need those, then you should be able to find a live transcript button at the bottom of your toolbar. And all participants are muted during this presentation. So I want to say thanks again for attending this event. I'm delighted to host some very experienced Arts Midwest grantees as they share their wisdom on presenting virtual or socially distanced events in the past year. As we begin to move out of the pandemic, we emerge with some more program delivery tools at our disposal now and new methods of reaching audiences beyond our local geography. So whether you're delivering programs virtually because of COVID or because you want to further your accessibility and outreach goals, we hope to provide some insightful information for you today to help your cause. So here's our agenda for this presentation. For today's event, we're going to spend the first 30 or 40 minutes or so hearing from the panel of past grantees, and then transition to a Q&A period where you can get some of your questions answered. Now you should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and if you'd like to ask a question, you can submit them at any time. You're also welcome to use the chat feature, which should be available too, to share your thoughts and comments throughout the presentation, but please use the Q&A box to ask questions of the panelists. So without further ado, I'll introduce today's panel of speakers. We have Julie Sherwood, the Education and Engagement Manager from Wichita Public Library, Mike Midlo, the Program Director from Fishtrap out in Oregon, and Marci Cancio-Bello, the Program Coordinator for Miami Book Fair down in Miami. And I believe Marci is going to kick us off, so I will stop sharing my screen and let her take it away.
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you all for setting this up and for all of you for being here. My name is Marci Cancio-Bello. I am an Asian woman with about mid-length black hair and a black photo backdrop, wearing a black shirt. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming to you from Miami, Florida. So I am representing Miami Book Fair at Miami-Dade College. For our big read, we did Hope Jaron's memoir, Lab Girl. We did that through March and April of this year, and it was completely virtual. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about what we did for the keynote, because we collaborated across the country for this presentation. So our keynote, Hope Jaron, for those of you who may be familiar with the book or may not, the author is an actual researcher who's currently in Oslo, Norway. And so we knew that the chances of getting her in person would be very slim when we proposed this book, but when the pandemic hit, and everything moved to virtual, it opened up different possibilities for us to be able to get her. So why not try? What we did discover is that most keynote speakers that Miami Book Fair has worked with, the starting honorarium request is about $15,000 to $20,000, depending on the person. And Hope Jaron was no different. Her range was 15 to 20, and her speaking agency, when we reached out, said that she will entertain offers starting at 15,000, but it's best offer. So if someone else comes in at a higher offer, she may take them instead of our invitation. So what ended up happening is that the Arts Midwest coordinated a meeting very similar to this one last summer that included breakout rooms by title. So anyone who's doing Lab Girl was in a group together, and we could discuss ideas, topics that we were covering, questions that we may have had about programming. And we all were talking about keynotes. We had different options. Of course, we all wanted to be able to invite Hope herself, but we all were in a similar boat of none of us can really bring up that honorarium amount, and she wasn't going to budge. So I had just seen several independent bookstores with this example. It was 11 different bookstores across the country collaborated to co-present Susan Choi, who's a novelist. And it was a moderated event, and every bookstore pitched or advertised to their specific audiences, and then, you know, an audience that might have 10 or 20 people and would not necessarily be able to get Susan Choi for their own bookstore. They were all able to collaborate. And so I pitched this idea to the organizations in that meeting, and they were all very interested to see how this could work moving forward into the virtual space. And so it was just an idea, but I was like, let's do it. Why not? The worst thing that we can say is that people will say is no. So the next steps for that were actually just confirming details. So very basic information like who wanted to participate. There were, I think, about 8 or 9 different organizations that were doing Hope's book for their Big Read program throughout the year. And not all of them were interested in participating. So we were able to confirm 7 different organizations, including Miami Book Fair. We also had to be very honest about other details, such as how much can each organization contribute. Now that includes honorarium. So if we had a couple $1,000s here, a couple $1,000s there, we could possibly cobble together to create, to match Hope's honorarium together, where none of us would be able to get her ourselves. But that contribution also include what kind of audiences we were planning to be able to offer in terms of the combination. So we actually were able to pitch an approximate 1,000 views expected among the 7 organizations. And another part of that is, of course, the book buy. How many books are we able to purchase in a combined pitch for our particular Big Read programs, so that it would be more enticing for the author and the publicist to entertain our invitations. So those were conversations that we had. I will say that I was the point person for this particular conversation, initiating the conversations and keeping track of the details. And I kept the contribution honorarium amounts confidential from the other organizations, except for our fiscal agent, which I'll talk about in a second. And that was just because we had programs of different sizes participating, and we didn't want anyone to feel like we had to break even if one of us was bringing maybe 200 people and someone else was bringing maybe 50 people, and smaller book buys and things like that. So really trying to fit everybody's budget and be cognizant of where everyone is at in their own programming and things like that. Another consideration is who can pay in advance versus who would have to pay close to or after the actual event. Miami Book Fair is very particular about paying people after services are rendered, but other organizations have a little bit more leeway in that. So we had to provide at least a 50% advance to lock in once we locked in the invitation. And so which organizations could put their part up first. And other questions are what dates work for everyone. So when you're working with 7 different organizations, working in multiple calendars, some people actually had ended up shifting. Actually, most of them had shifted to spring of 2021. So even if they were normally in the fall, they had shifted for the pandemic year. And so it ended up working out that we were able to work with everyone's March, April, May dates for our calendar. And then another question, which is really important, is who's going to be the main contact. So this person, which was myself, is emailing everyone, sending updates, keeping track of deadlines and requests from everyone, fielding private questions as well as group emails, and just keeping track of all of those things. So we were able to officially confirm 7 organizations across 4 different time zones. So Mountain, Central, Eastern on the US side. And then of course the author was in Central European time. So that spanned about 8 hours, which narrowed down our ability to book an actual date. So we all settled on Saturday, which allowed for flexibility for everyone's audience in terms of work days and things like that. Now, some of the things that we learned about contracting with Hope Jaron's speaking agency. So normally there's a publicist for every book that gets published by a traditional publisher. In the case of Hope Jaron, she had a speaking agency. So Penguin Random House had a speakers bureau that we were working with. One of the organizations had already initiated contact, so we were working directly with that person. But Hope also has her own agent, Harry Walker Agency, that was working with the speaking agency. So the speaking agency was actually a middle person communicating our needs and desires to Harry Walker Agency and back and forth. It did get a little bit complicated with that. Questions that they had that if you are interested in doing this sort of group collaborative pitch, things to have ready as part of your invitation or immediately after when the conversation really gets rolling are what types of organizations are involved. So they were very interested in the fact that there were libraries, public library systems involved, as well as college systems and nonprofits. And they all have slightly different requirements and flexibility with the speaking agencies. Again, coming back to that combined book buy, we were able to, I think altogether, we said we were purchasing about 5,000. I could be totally misremembering that. As a combination of that, it might have been closer to 3. I'll double check those details. And then combined views. So we pitched that we would anticipate about 1,000 people would be viewing or replaying the video. And it ended up being about 920 all told around that week. And so it ended up working out. But that did matter for the Harry Walker Agency in terms of what they wanted to charge. And so we figured 1,000 was a safe number of people. They said if it was something, if we pitched 1,000 and 5,000 people showed up, then they would want to retroactively try to charge us more money. So thankfully, we were pretty safe in that. They also wanted to know what dates. And so we were like, all of April, any Saturday in April, except for Easter Saturday. But we had to prioritize which dates we wanted, and that required a little bit of finagling with all of the groups. The preferred event format. So is this a keynote where the author is expected to be solo? Is there going to be a moderator? Is she expected to do any kind of demonstrations or anything like that? Are there any specific topics that you're expecting her to cover? Which was pretty easy considering the book covers many different topics. Again, the honorarium and whether there's flexibility there, and then any technology. So they wanted to know right out of the gate, how are we going to stream this? What details were there going to be in terms of screen sharing opportunities, security, Zoom bombing was still a concern and things like that. So who's monitoring the chats? Is there registration? All of that we had to have as ready to go as possible in the conversation. And then one thing I would highly recommend is that, so there were a few issues in terms of working with the speaking agency who was then working with the author's agent. What happened is that Penguin Random House accounting department actually could no longer process split invoices, but they only told us that after 3 months of moving the contract around and getting everybody to sign it, and every organization had already signed it, we were going to work directly with the speaking agency. And then they said, oh, our accountant can no longer process multiple invoices for the same event. It must be one invoice, one fiscal agent. And so Penguin Random House's speaking agent got in trouble for that. And then Harry Walker Agency also said, we don't do that either. So we had to go back to the group, and thankfully Joshua also stepped into the conversation to help clarify some details that we ended up directly contracting with Harry Walker Agency instead of the speaking agency with the publishing house. And so if you can work directly and cut out that middle person for the contracting, that's ideal. I'd also recommend moving forward from the beginning with one of your organizations appointed as a fiscal agent who will contract for the full amount, and then every other organization contracts with that organization for their part. That is a few extra contracting pieces, but one of the wonderful things that Arts Midwest offers as part of the grant, and I hope will continue, is that you can request a portion of your grant money in advance to be able to pay that honorarium amount if that's not already in your accounts, to be able to cover. And that was a conversation that I think that we all had as a group too, and I'm sure Joshua is a great resource for that. So in terms of details for the streaming platform that we actually used, details, again, this not only applies to the contract, but also to the system that you're using. So if you're purchasing a virtual platform access that limits the number of views that you can have, it is very important to be aware of how many people you anticipate. Miami Book Fair, you can see this image. I know it's very tiny. Miami Book Fair actually built our own secure platform. It's sort of like Netflix for books for Miami Book Fair in November 2020. So we already had this platform built and it was secure. There was password protection, which was also important to the agency and the author. And you can see that pink button at the bottom. It says how to access this event. This is a free password protected event. You must register here. So there was a separate registration form with an automated email that we set up that had a password that people could access. And we made it look like a unique password, but it was in fact the same for everyone. So there was no confusion. And so that was one of the requirements of the agency. The other part of the streaming platform is that we used StreamYard. So that's a live streaming service, but it's actually, you can use it as a private studio and then link it to up to 8 different things. So we've linked it to our Miami Book Fair online platform. And then 2 of the other organizations, 2 of the public libraries, used unlisted YouTube links. So you couldn't publicly list it. And if you Googled it, it wouldn't show up. They handled their own registration, and it was pre-approved only because they were public libraries. Miami Book Fair would not have been approved for that. One of the other organizations was not approved for that. So the rest of the people funneled all their audiences toward the Miami Book Fair online platform. We did have to pre-approve the Q&A part. So every organization put out a call for questions from their audiences that were participating in the Big Read, and then compiled a list, took out any duplicates and sent it. And the author pre-approved them. She went through, combined different questions and things like that. And then we also shared them with our moderator, who facilitated the Q&A as well as his own questions. And we worked with J. Drew Lanham, who he's a poet and a memoirist, and it was a really wonderful conversation. He was a great moderator. I'd highly recommend him. One of the other considerations that Chillicothe Public Library brought up, which we were really grateful for, is captioning. So accessibility for virtual events. We used Caption Access, which it has a combination of diverse captioners who you can do live captioning, you can do a pre-created script. Most of the systems like Zoom and Crowdcast can integrate with the software Caption Access uses. StreamYard does not. So they ended up putting the transcript on a separate link that we dropped periodically throughout the chat and announced also, and was available long after the event was over. It is an extra tab to open those, so that is a consideration for streamlining things. But we chose captioning over ASL because not everyone who needs it is fluent in ASL compared to being able to read captioning. And captioning could also work for non-native English speakers as well. So Miami has a very large non-English first language population. So that worked really well for us. And they were wonderful to work with, but there are other groups as well. One other thing that I cannot stress enough is that tech check everything. And have different admin to do different jobs. I was introducing and running the actual event, and then Hope Jaron decided at the last minute to provide a PowerPoint presentation, which didn't work as well as she wanted it to. And we had different teammates who were monitoring the chat and things, but it can get a little bit messy unless you pre-assign. And then the two libraries were monitoring their own chat and links. So some summarizing tips for success that we learned the hard way is discuss what you want up front and what you can be flexible on versus what you can't be flexible on. So things like the payment, things like dates versus book buys and things like that. Appoint a main contact to spearhead all communication as early in the process as possible. I will warn you that if you are that point person and that point organization, it can be a lot to take on to monitor. So just be aware that you will have to be on top of things on behalf of everyone, and may have to follow up with people often. Also, again, I cannot stress this enough, if you can appoint one fiscal agent to contract with the speaking agency or the author's agent directly, instead of trying to do the multiple things that we were trying to do. We were kind of caught in the transition from Penguin Random House no longer offering that option. The other thing is to build in a lot of time for this. So the contracting process alone took about 5 months, from August to January, with of course winter break in between. We started the conversation with the agency in late August, and we didn't really get to finalize the actual contract, the final contract, until about January. And then we had about the 2 months, 2.5 months from that to April to actually execute all of the other details. Provide clear deadlines for people. So there were some of our organizational partners, most of them were incredibly on point, and people who didn't respond, we just assumed that they were fine with the material and were moving forward. But we were very clear about deadlines and emails so that everyone was on the same page. It's easier to follow up with everyone. This kind of group collaboration does require an incredibly detail-oriented person who can keep track of things like the contract requirements, especially as you come up with the run of show, talk to the moderator, work with your tech people, talk to all the other teams, and then double checking all the links, the screen shares. If possible, some authors are very particular about this, but please try to do the screen shares yourself as an admin, especially if you're comfortable with that technology. I cannot stress that enough. And then, of course, plan for accessibility and inclusion. And what does that mean in terms of free events, registration-based events, live streaming versus replay, captioning versus ASL, other things like that. If you have a large non-native English, non-English speaking community, are you doing simultaneous translation, things like that. And so those are things that we really learned. I know I'm blasting through this material, but as Joshua mentioned, we will have a Q&A part at the end, and you can always email me if I moved too quickly through this, or you have any other follow-up questions that are specific to things that you're interested in terms of large collaborative ideas like this. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Marci. Those are super helpful for those of us who are hoping to bring in an author and possibly coordinating with other communities. And just want to remind everyone before we go over to Mike, our next speaker, that author visits are not required, nor is partnering with other Big Read grantees. But this was an extreme and a very ambitious example that was achieved last year with lots of work going into it, as you might imagine, to make this author visit happen in several time zones and multiple grantee sites. So kudos to Marci for setting all that up. I'm going to hand it off things now to Mike from Fishtrap in Oregon to tell us about his experiences last year.
Thanks, Josh. Hey, everybody. Mike Midlo here. I'm kind of nervous. Just to break the ice, I can't see everybody. Would you all just type in your name and where you are and let me know if this is your first Big Read coming up or your 10th? It's just be good to see. who's out there in the audience. The lights are so bright, I can't see out into the audience. I want to tell you first, Josh asked me to talk a little bit about doing virtual programming in rural areas, but I want you all to know that I think this information is completely applicable in suburban and urban environments too. I'm going to share my screen here. I work at Fishtrap, which is in the very, very, very northeast corner of Oregon. Here's Portland. Most people know about Portland, but 6 or 7 hour drive and you end up out here. It's very rural. There's 7,000 people in the entire county. We're 2 hours from the nearest airport and 70 plus miles from the nearest stoplight or shopping mall. So it's a rural place. And we've been a part of the Big Read since 2006, which I think was the first year of the Big Read program. And it's been a great way to just pull the community together. We host it in the winter because it works best for school schedules. But that also poses lots of challenges because we have a pretty robust winter here in Wallowa County. Last year, when the pandemic hit, historically, Fishtrap, as have all the other Big Read communities around the country, we've had a mix of events, live in-person events and discussions that dive in deep into the subject of the book or have a broad appeal, and getting people out into the community and talk to each other and enjoy together a great book. And then when the pandemic hit, all of us at Fishtrap didn't know what to do. How are we going to pull off the Big Read? And there was a moment of just staring off into the distance. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is great. And here's why. Every year we talk about and think about, and it develops more and more every year, about accessibility and inclusion and equity in our programs. A lot of people, because there's less than one person per square mile here and twice as many cows as human beings, there are distances, and not every person can get to Big Read events because they don't have a car, or they're a kid, or they've lost their license. So transportation has always been something we've talked about. The time of day, some people don't like to drive at night or go out at night. Weather conditions, this is continually a problem, snowstorms, etc., icy roads. Childcare, not everybody can afford or access childcare. Can they afford the tickets? Most of our events, if not all, are free, but can they, afford it? Mobility, of course. If you're hearing impaired or sight impaired, can you enjoy a live event with lots of noise around? If you have social anxiety, not everybody likes being in a crowded room with other people. So those are things we talked about every year. And by the pandemic hitting it, it forced us to address those issues by having a completely virtual Big Read. And what it did was provide those opportunities for people to access programming live when it happened, or we recorded everything and put it on our, well, I'll just show you. We put it on our YouTube channel. Where is it? Oh goodness, now you got me. Well, I'll find it. But here's our Big Read page. This is what we did this past year. The book was In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick. And we thought about all the different ways that we can provide programming to people where they are, in their classroom, in their living room, at their lunch break at work. We created a whole ton of Big Read resources that people could access at choose their own adventure, from online exhibits, video lectures, documentaries. This is just stuff we all found as a committee and created links to. But we also created a list of events, weekly events. And our kickoff was with Dr. Lisa T. Balance at the Newport Marine Science Center on the Oregon coast. Here's another great thing that happened. Because we had virtual events, we didn't have to get people to come here. We didn't have to pay for travel or hotels. And like I said, because of weather conditions, this place is a long ways from anywhere. And so guests that we normally wouldn't have accepted our invitation because it was virtual, they did. So we got this great mammal scientist to talk about whales. And it was a great way to do our kickoff. Not only people from right here in Wallowa County accessed it, but because she's well known, people from all over the country accessed this Big Read event. So we found out that we could reach even more people by doing virtual events. We also partnered with the Columbia River Maritime Museum in Astoria, as the Pacific Ocean dumps into the briny blue, with Julia Triesenberg. And we did these weekly talks that were for families and kids, and that teachers could play in the, let's see if there's anything here. Oh yeah. Hi, everybody. That's me. And those were just a blast to be able to, we couldn't have brought Julia out for a month, but we got to visit with her for 5 weeks, and that was great fun. Also, as Marci was talking about, getting authors to come. Man, there were several years where I thought, why don't the authors want to come? How come they charge so much? We're buying hundreds of their books. We're celebrating their books. And it ends up just, that's the way they make their living. So I've accepted it. But because pre-pandemic, author Nathaniel Philbrick gave a polite no. He lives on Nantucket Island, on 3,000 miles away from here. And he said the travel was just too much. Well, a couple months later, I went back to him and said, how about if you give our finale from the comfort of your living room? And he said, yeah, I'll do that. This is how much I get, or his agent said that. I said, oh man, that's kind of rough. So again, like Marci did, we reached out for the first time to another Big Read community, Middletown Public Library in New Jersey, and said, hey, do you want to share the costs of the honorarium? And they enthusiastically said yes. And so for the first time, we did a cross-country Big Read celebration, and it was really, really positive. I want to share with you just a couple other things with partnerships. Through our virtual programming, we had a more accessible event schedule and discussions. Schools were able to fold in the Big Read as part of their school, as part of their curriculum, and be able to watch these events online and take them in and have discussions. Libraries were able to take advantage of these events, not only here in Wallowa County, our little corner of the world, but libraries all over Oregon and the country, really. Organizations and foundations and businesses who help support the Big Read had a much bigger imprint on their contributions, since people not just here who would have come to a live event, but who are checking out Big Read events online, which was really cool. So all in all, if you go to Fishtrap's YouTube channel, which I should be able to pull up, it shows, for instance, each event has maybe 53 views or 60 views or 35 views, but that isn't even close to how many people actually accessed it. Each one, like as many as 50% of those clicks represent a classroom of 30 or 40 kids. And so we calculated that 730 some youth in classrooms accessed the Big Read virtual programming. So what are we going to do moving forward? We are enthusiastic to go back to have live in-person events for the Big Read, but we are also going to provide continue to provide online events because they're more accessible and have a farther reach. So I hope that that was a valuable story. Again, like with Marci, if anybody wants tips on getting these authors to come, I've got a few tricks. You're welcome to get in touch with me. But that's what I've got. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Mike. I love hearing you speak. And if you want to share your contact info in the chat, if you're so inclined, I know people would be interested in picking your brain. Our last but not least, we have a speaker from Wichita, Julie Sherwood, and she's going to tell us about her last year.
Good afternoon. I'm Julie Sherwood, the Education and Engagement Manager for the Wichita Public Library. And the big read that I'm going to be talking about was one that was for the book Circe by Madeline Miller. The book was planned to be done in October, November of 2020. Let me share my screen here. And when we first heard about our grant, we had just gone into closure, and basically we had to try to reimagine how we were going to do our big read. We normally do it in October and November of the year, and we realized very quickly that that was not going to work. So we pulled a virtual meeting together in July of 2020 with our partners to talk about the changes. And we decided that January, February 21 was a better fit. It would give us more time to figure out how we were going to do our programming. And at that point, we were just starting to do some Zoom programming. And basically, we needed to rethink how all of the programs would work. But we felt like Zoom was not really an ideal fit for our kickoff. What we normally do in a kickoff event is have live music and dance. We do a photographic slideshow. We do various kinds of art, poetry, readers theater, and that kind of complexity didn't seem to fit with a Zoom format. So we had just been talking about the fall for our youth, and we're working on some pre-recorded content for them. And those were pre-recorded and put on the library's YouTube channel, but then we thought, could we do it bigger than YouTube? And the idea that we came up with was to partner with our local public television station. We've been hearing from a lot of people who did not have home computing, they didn't have internet, they didn't have a device, and even if they had it, they were very uncomfortable with how to use it. And we thought the one device that really everyone can use and do was television, and public television is in such a great number of homes and would give us the broadest reach. They have some of the same goals that we do to provide free content to the public. And basically, they've been a partner with us on previous big reads by showing programming that fits with our big read and also helping us to promote the events that we're doing on big read. It also fit within our cost plan. They gave us 3 options. One was we would do it completely in their studios. They would do the recording and the editing and make it happen and broadcast it. The second lowest, the middle option was we could create the content and they would do the editing for us. And the least expensive option was for us to do all of the creation and editing ourselves and submit it to them a month in advance. And it would have to be just reviewed so that it met all of their requirements for production. And they did have a several page document of all of the requirements that they needed it to have to be acceptable for their guidelines. We are fortunate to be able to work with our city IT department. They have a digital content creator that works closely with the library on recording and editing content. And basically, we wanted to get that person involved to make our production happen. So we were able to go with the lowest cost required. We also had to move our production deadline up pretty far. Even though our kickoff, we normally don't have to have everything in place until the day of the kickoff. In this case, we had to have it ready a couple of months ahead of time so that we could get through the editing and reviewing process in time. We were able to get most of the pretty much all of the segments at no cost by the presenters, which allowed us to pay for the broadcast itself. But we did have some challenges. The first were the copyright legalities. We typically have readers' theater in the session, and we are allowed in a public event to read from the work, and that's not converting it in any way. That's not a change in format, so there's no copyright issues. But once you convert it into a recorded form, then you usually need to get all kinds of permissions, and they want to know which parts you're using. And basically, we had to kind of rethink that. We also had to think about the fact that if you put it on a recorded format, you also have to worry about the permissions that for any recorded music that you're putting on there. We were able to think about how we would do the transitions between the parts, and we were able to get a local media person to be the MC. And basically, we had such a great response from our performers and the community in getting partners to help us pull this together. What we did instead of our readers' theater, we got someone from the local public radio station who used to work in the bookstore, but is now kind of the literature person for public radio. She did a book review. There's no reading from the book, but she was able to kind of give people the flavor of the book through a review itself. All of the harpists that we were doing for music agreed to do performances that were using music that was either already in the public domain, and one of them actually created a custom harp performance, a musical piece that was just for our big read, and it was amazing. Basically, we had some new elements because it was on television. We were able to kind of think of some new things that we could do. So for example, we talked about Wichita's history with the Big Read. We've been doing these since 2008, and we had a kind of an interview with staff about that process and some of the memories we had of that. We also had a welcome from our lieutenant governor, who had agreed to be our honorary co-chair for our Big Read, and did a piece for that. So these are some images from the recording that we did. One of the harpists brought in her harp to the library. We cleared the space in our children's gallery while the library was, the public was unable to come to our meeting rooms. She came to the meeting room to be filmed. We went out to one of our partner organizations. This is City Arts, and they were going to be doing a loom weaving demonstration. So as you can see on this frame, that Kyle is our digital content creator, and he is showing Alicia doing a demo of the loom weaving, and that was going to be an upcoming program. So it was kind of a preview of something that they would see in our Big Read. We also had 2 school librarians do book reviews of our companion titles. So we have one of our middle school librarians on the left who had served on our program partner team, and the head of school media on the right, who is who has been a longtime partner with our Big Read. We were also partnering with the local extension office, and they were going to be doing a Mediterranean cooking program. So they did a short demo program for us, and basically we were able to share that as part of our kickoff event as well. And we had to think very carefully about how we would do the book giveaway, which we normally make a part of our kickoff event. But if people would not be in the building, we asked how would they get a copy of the book. So we told people, and they were calling already in advance to the library to find out how they would get a copy of the book. And we told them they would need to watch the broadcast on Saturday afternoon, January 9th, and we would tell them at the end of the broadcast what they could do to get a free book. And the plan that we had was they would be given out in the library parking lot at the end of the day on Saturday. It was a cold January day, but we were all up for it, and we had several volunteers from our partners. We were in the parking lot and we gave them instructions. We had people designated for where the drive-through, and we had no idea how many people would show up and how many people would watch our broadcast. But that evening we gave away 267 copies of the book, so we were thrilled. And we found out 2 months later, when the Nielsen ratings came out, that there had been 1,267 people who had been watching television to see our kickoff. And we would not have been able to accommodate more than 270 people in our meeting room. So we were able to expand the number of people who were introduced to our Big Read through using our public television as a broadcast medium for our kickoff. This is an image of our Lieutenant Governor, who did a welcome message for our broadcast. And he's been a big literacy supporter, and it was great to have him as part of our event. This was also Annette Lawless, who was an anchor for one of our local stations, who was the MC of the event and kind of did the transitions between. And this is Beth Golay, who worked for public radio and did a book review of Circe. So we had a number of different things. Many of our other Big Read programs were able to be accommodated on Zoom, and we got very familiar with using Zoom, and actually our customers got really familiar. And for many of the reasons that Mike named previously, a lot of people were able to participate who would never have been able to participate had all of these programs been done in person at the library. So we were thrilled to have the help and support of all of our partners in making this work. We've also been doing something called the Beanstack Challenge, and many libraries are using Beanstack to track summer reading programs and adult reading programs. We use it as a tool as part of our Big Read to give people challenges, and we have giveaways for people who engage in a number of activities for our Big Read. So for example, they get one badge for reading the Big Read title. They get another badge for reading companion titles. Coming to an event can get them a badge, but then we also offer chances for them to submit artwork, poetry, photography that relates to themes that are in the book, and create we try to make things as accessible as possible. Some people might have a themed meal at their workplace or with their friends. And so we give people activities that are pretty easy to do, and that puts them in a drawing. And this year we had original artwork on a postcard that we gave to people who got the challenge, did the challenge, I should say. So one thing that we did learn from this process, we had a couple of events that used video clips, and we found that Zoom did not, even though it can be done, a video can be shown through Zoom. We learned that the quality is variable, and the streaming speeds are really hard to do through Zoom. So we found that Vimeo is a better platform. And it also works better for things when we need when the requirements are that we need to control for publicity purposes, we're not allowed to publicly put something out there. For example, a publisher doesn't want us to put a reading of their book out for the public. So we need to make sure that it's only our customers that are getting it. So we do registration, and then we give them a Vimeo link, which allows it to be private. You can also do it through, as Marci mentioned, through unpublished YouTube. Most of our YouTube stuff is published, but we thought that Vimeo works really well for videos and documentaries. And basically, if you have questions, just email me or put it in the chat.
All right, so now we're in the Q&A portion of the presentation. I do see that we have one question in there pending, which I'll pose to the group in just a second. So I just want to invite anyone, if they have questions they'd like to submit, you can go ahead and do so via the Q&A box. Also, if you want to pose your question verbally, you can use the raise your hand button, which you should see down there at the bottom, and I can unmute you so you can pose your question that way. But I will go ahead and read off the question that we've got so far. And this one is for the group at large, but I imagine might be more for Julie's expertise. The question is, if I convert our Zoom recording of a session to post on our YouTube channel, how do we get permission if a presenter is reading a section from a book?
The publishers want you to contact their publicity and rights department. And what they want to know is, are you charging for the event? How many people do you expect? What segments or portions of the book are you planning to read? They ask you for page numbers and the date of your event. They want all of those details. And typically, if it's a free event and it's not out there for the public, and if it's for your, you give all the parameters to them. Typically, they won't charge, but in the cases where I've heard that they do charge, it's typically something like $100 to $150 for permission to use that portion.
All right, any other questions from the audience? Comments, even? I posted your contact information, Julie, for someone who asked for it. Another question, what do you use to broadcast online for most accessibility for multiple customers?
Is this for me or
for anybody?
Our library uses Zoom most of the time. We were initially by the city offered Teams, but we found that that was a little difficult of a platform. So we used mostly Zoom. We've also used Vimeo, and basically we have put things on our YouTube channel, and we've also tried some things with Facebook. But what we do with our Zoom programs is our digital department converts it into video format, edits it, and then puts it on YouTube as a video.
I'd like to add too that what Miami Book Fair has found is sometimes streaming to multiple platforms at once can reach different audiences, like audiences that are not on Facebook or that feel more comfortable on Zoom or otherwise. If they have, maybe they haven't downloaded Zoom, maybe they are nervous about the technology. So the more platforms, especially for a free event, that you can do, the better. We were able to track more views, and also the notifications are different for each system. In terms of accessibility, though, not everything is friendly for captioning. I think Zoom's using Google Translate, and it's pretty solid, except for like proper names and some things, or if people aren't articulating clearly. And I think that Crowdcast also does something similar. But some people are not allowed to use certain platforms, like some organizations, like Miami Book Fair wasn't allowed to use Zoom for a long time. So that might play into what people are used to using or what you might have at your disposal.
Thanks for that additional context. Yeah, it might be more accessible for people to get on different platforms, but there would be potentially an accessibility trade-off if that platform doesn't quite have captions or accommodations of that sort. We got one in the chat about virtual sessions and distributing surveys or other forms of evaluations for those. Open to the panel.
I will go ahead and tell you how we do it. The library uses something from the Public Library Association called Project Outcome. And basically these are survey forms that they have designed to use in programs which can be done either electronically or printed in physical paper form. And so we've done all of our surveys in Project Outcome, and we give people the link both in the chat. When we first register people through our library calendar, we then have the ability to send emails to them with the link to our program. And in that email that we send, it has the link to the program, any handouts that the presenter wanted to give people, and also a link to the survey when the program's over. So at the end of the program, we tell them that we're putting the link in the chat, but they can also find it in their invitation email. And then they're able to go in after the program and fill out the Project Outcome survey. And we're able to hear their feedback in that way.
Any other thoughts on that question about surveying, evaluation, getting feedback?
Miami Book Fair uses FormStack because we don't have set parameters for our different events. So and each survey is a different requirement. FormStack allows for different types of layouts and things, and you can track when and how people submit their surveys. We also work a lot with sometimes qualitative surveys, just asking people to comment more open-ended than surveys, and also just emailing them a bunch of times and being like, please submit this by X date. It'll only take you X amount of minutes. And that can help people sometimes, just having it everywhere as a reminder, and knowing that there are a lot of people who are just not going to respond. But also maybe telling them why. That's helpful. Like, this will help us with grant reporting to continue to offer these programs and things. Sometimes people will pull their heartstrings a little more to give you 5 minutes of their time.
Let's see, we have 2 more questions. One might be a 30-minute long response, but how difficult was it to work with the partner organizations in different parts of the country? Marci, I think you two might need to connect on that one.
So, no, go ahead.
I was just saying our experience with Middletown Public Library and the Marine Science Center and the Columbia River Maritime Museum they were all enthusiastic about it. It just was a pleasure. I think everyone was excited about doing these new sorts of things and being able to reach people during, I mean, this was in the depths of the pandemic, right? Maybe we still are, but that's the way it worked for us. I'm really interested in Julie's comment in the chat about our next big challenge is hybrid programming for both live and recorded formats. How do we do both of them at the same time? That's what I'm thinking about these days.
I think we're all thinking that moving forward. I had a similarly wonderful experience. I mean, all the organizations that I worked with those, all 7 partners were incredibly supportive and very generous with patience as the difficulties of the contracting came to light. I will say that it was more of just keeping details straight sometimes, where the contracts didn't, people were like, oh, we can keep our YouTube links up for replay, but the contract only allowed the unlisted YouTube links to be live. And some people had virtual watch parties, you know, and things like that. But just kind of keeping track of those things and keeping people updated. I think sometimes I get random emails like, what's happening? I haven't heard from you in a week. And just being conscientious of putting everyone's mind at ease. And I'm sure you can, I'm happy to provide a list of all of our partners, and I'm sure they'd love to give you their experiences working with me as the coordinator. But from my end, it was honestly the best that it could have been in terms of support, because we were all in the same boat. We all wanted it to succeed and be a really wonderful experience for everyone involved. And I will also say that Arts Midwest was really great about keeping tabs on our conversation of our 20 emails a day. And that was helpful to know that we had the support of you know, the organization as well. Yeah, I would just say keeping those deadlines and keeping on track, it was the hardest part. But if you are an Excel spreadsheet nerd, it's fine. Maybe.
Right, I know we're a little bit over time, but I'll just throw in one more for the road. It's a question about live streaming and how you live stream between multiple platforms at once. So are you able to do Vimeo and YouTube at the same time? And how do you kind of ensure the quality of the live stream across all those different platforms to make sure everything's kind of in sync? If anybody would want to jump in on that, please feel free.
I will say that for us, we don't do them synchronously in sync with each other. So for example, we do a virtual event and then we transition it to video, and then we put it in its static form on YouTube. So we have not done any live streaming on YouTube. We also, a long time ago, we tried a Facebook streaming program, and we had some transmission difficulties with that, and also people who complained that they didn't have access to Facebook. So we haven't used it, although I know that some of our partners have used Facebook. But that's kind of where we're heading when I say that we're looking at how you do hybrid things, live things at the same time as something else. That whole synchronicity element is going to be a big challenge to figure out.
Yeah, I'll just add, Julie, that we were, all of us everywhere, were just figuring out how to do this at the same time. And there were some good opportunities through Arts Midwest and other programs that we have to see what other folks are doing. I just want to, what Fishtrap does is we stream our events live, like our upcoming Summer Fishtrap conference is coming, and there are going to be daily readings. They go live to YouTube and then are immediately available afterwards. We can also, I want to quickly, I know everybody's got to go, myself included, but I just quickly show our YouTube page. It's a mix of different programming that we have. So these are the Big Read events that we had this past winter. And then like our reading series, Fishtrap Fireside, we edit a little bit. You know, we put a slate at the beginning and at the end, and sometimes take out my flubs, which always happen. And then there are all sorts of other readings and things that we do. Some are pre-recorded and edited in, you know, whatever video editing program we have. Luckily, I'm not the tech person. I just put on the show, so.
I just want to quickly add to that the reason we use StreamYard is because we can, it does allow up to 8 different platforms at once. There is a 30-second delay, so I test run everything, making sure that people can link properly, provide the right streaming key information. I also wrangled a lot of my colleagues to just jump on this page or jump on that page and just monitor, always being in contact with the partners whose pages are also live streaming something in terms of the in-sync nature, and also sort of streaming questions on various chats to maybe one Google Doc or one group chat, so that we could drop that in for any presenters and things like that. It takes some practice, and things can definitely go wrong in terms of the sync. But if you warn the presenters in advance, they're usually pretty good about, like, just mention, like, talk through things, be willing to allow for a little bit of that lag. And everyone is a little forgiving, or has been for the whole last couple of years now, with any difficulties or lag or anything like that.
All right, we've reached the end of our time here together. I want to thank our esteemed panelists from across the country, both coasts and from the middle of the country. So thanks for you guys for presenting on your experiences for the past year, and thanks to the audience for attending. We're going to put a recording of this up in the online community as soon as we can, and I encourage you all to stay connected through there. And if you need any assistance or want to reach out to us here at Arts Midwest, we can make those connections for you as well. So I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.